Today's show is brought to you by Ian O'Neill's fantastic podcast, How They Did It, Filmmaking. Hello and welcome to Film Pro Productivity, the podcast that helps film professionals and other creatives to live a more focused, effective and happy life. My name is Carter Ferguson and this is episode 34, Best Laid Plans. So here we are with a third season of the show, which will roll out every Sunday now at 7 PM GMT for the next few months, and should end just a day or two before the end of the year. This season we have 18 new shows, and a few of them are connected. Today I'll be talking you through Season 3 to some extent, but the episode is called Best Laid Plans for good reason, as often the plans and strategies that we attempt to put into action start to disintegrate about us, and then we have to stop, rethink what we're doing, and make some changes before we can move on again. I've decided to make this the first episode of Season 3 as it's a topic that's come up a few times on social media, and I've also had a number of conversations with individuals who listen to the show about this problem, and I think it's something we all have to deal with somewhere down the line. So today we're going to be looking at how to handle it if things don't quite go as planned. First though, let me give you a bit of a preview of what's coming up in Season 3. Bearing in mind what I've just said though, this is subject to change. Sometimes I find that a topic that I've chosen to put in a later episode kind of gets covered in an earlier one, or sometimes I just find a topic that trumps one of my planned shows and I switch it around. Another thing that I do quite often is I'll actually switch the order of the shows just to make the season hopefully a little bit more dynamic. Season 3 will, of course, be bringing you more episodes based on the productivity techniques, tips and tricks that have been working so well in the business and lifestyle worlds. These will include episodes about the 16 laws of success, elephant habits, and developing a sense of urgency. As my Tell It How It Is episodes always seem to be popular, I'll also be including an episode about dealing with bullies, which is a particularly prevalent problem here and there in the film industry in my own country, and it may have some bearing in what you are dealing with wherever you are in the world too. I'm wanting to do a show about bullshitters too, but I haven't figured out how to deliver that one without swearing. Bear with me, I'm working on it. Elsewhere this season, I will be talking about stress and anxiety, arrogance and pride, imposter syndrome, something known as outrage porn, which is not what you imagine it to be, I would think. Also crowdfunding lessons, why we shouldn't apply for funding, and another recent discovery of mine called the labour illusion. Most episodes will be based on the new 10-minute motivation format, which focuses the show down to one major topic without wandering too far off subject. But some episodes, such as crowdfunding lessons were learned, and this one here, will run a bit longer as there's just a lot to cover. The best laid plans of mice and men often go awry, wrote a paraphrased Robert Burns, and that's what I want to get into with this episode. You see, we need to accept that no matter how carefully a strategy, a project, and anything really is planned, something might still go wrong. Mike Tyson says, everyone has a plan till they get punched in the mouth. This year I've been figuratively punched in the mouth a number of times and my plans have tumbled like a house of cards about me. 9 months into my best year yet strategy, which I introduced to you in the New Year special, I have had to entirely abandon those plans and move my focus on to completely different things. There were a number of specific happenings that contributed to the general fucking up of my efforts, but far from having regret over the change, I am celebrating in a newfound freedom. I'm thankful to all of those who said no to me. It's because of them that I'm doing it myself. Albert Einstein, unquote. The best year yet system is a good one, but I made a major miscalculation in my strategy. I hung several major goals on something which I had no control over whatsoever. a funding application. It's easy for me to see in hindsight that it was a completely stupid idea, but at the time I was certain that I was making the right move. I felt somehow that my time had come, and with my best project, which I'd been working on for several years, I was sure that I'd be successful. Historically, I've never had any form of tangible support from funding organisations, but this time did seem different, or so I thought. It was an application not for financial support, but for access to a mentoring programme with a residential element. And I spent weeks on this application, and I had a number of people help me to refine and improve my project so that it was tailor-made to fit this application. Even the form itself was refined and bettered over a series of passes, and I got the application in on time, and I thought it was pretty darn good, and that's when things started going very wrong. I had unwittingly stepped into a minefield of unpredictability, completely out with my control. After I submitted the application, you see, which incidentally only had a 3-week gap for submissions, so I had to really focus my time, cancel jobs in order to make sure that my application was as good as possible. But after I submitted it, the organisation running things suddenly decided to extend their deadline for applications by a further 6 weeks. To put it simply, this was disastrous for my best year yet strategy, as it knocked my next 2 deadlines together and ensured that I could not complete every subsequent goal to the schedule I had laid out that year. Had I not hung my plans on this application's original deadline and structured several of my main goals beyond it, I would have been able to save my scheduled plan. But when they moved the goalposts, I couldn't even resubmit an improved application, as my next major goal was Season 2 of this show, which launched successfully and on time, but only as I had complete control over it. That was the last of my scheduled major goals to be met this year. Albert Einstein once said, "I am thankful for all of those who said no to me. It's because of them that I am doing it myself." To cut a long story short in regard to my application, I didn't even get an interview. And that was the straw that broke the camel's already heavily weighted back. That was the day, after 12 years of trying, that I gave up on filmmaking. But this isn't an episode about dealing with rejection. That's a topic for another day. This is about how to handle it when things don't go as planned. So let's go on with that in mind. And the lesson here obviously is, if you are making strategic plans tied to dates, do not, whatever you do, make the same mistake I did and tie your plans to something you just can't control. As one door closes, however, another one opens. And I think, in the long run, it was a good thing. Incidentally, there's a whole host of reasons why I might have been rejected, but as they didn't deign to share them with me, I'm going to say that my project just didn't fit the bill. Whatever the reason though, I had to deal with it, and it took me a few months to recover, as it was an incredibly destructive mistake. Things are moving again now with my newly created Plan B. Mistakes are part of life, you can't avoid them. All you can hope is that they won't be too expensive and you don't make the same mistake twice. Iacocca, unquote. Dealing with change in life is something that we all have to face up to now and again, as we just can't control everything, although I do know a few people who think they can. When the worst happens though, how do you deal with it? Do you resist change and fight it? Or do you go with the flow and adapt? Do you spiral into depression, or do you handle it with positivity? Me personally, I do a bit of both. I might quietly rage or be down about something, but eventually I get back up again and I start over. Like the earlier quote I used by Einstein, we have to face up to the fact that pain is part of growing. It literally pains me to know this, as I've learned it the hard way, as I think many of us have. But if I hadn't had my breakdown a few years ago, if I hadn't lost both my parents one after the other, if I hadn't had terrible times with awful people again and again on terrible creative projects, then I wouldn't be here now pushing out my positivity and receiving it back via this show. Hard as it may seem to swallow sometimes, every struggle we have is a step forward and will make us better. It was through these difficult experiences that I learned to say to myself that this too shall pass. Remember that everything in life is temporary, and the pain we feel today will fade in time. New doors will open in life, and in our work, and in our relationships. I often say here, don't worry, everything is going to be okay. Because as adults, we just don't hear that often enough. We simply worry too much, and it changes nothing. I'll be tackling worry and anxiety in a later episode this season. Another thing that changes nothing is complaining. Everyone likes a good moan, so if you have to, go for it, but cut it off sooner rather than later, or you'll never be able to move past it. Like my application analogy earlier, I thought I at least deserved an interview, and I didn't even get that. But who am I going to complain to? And will my moaning about it all get me anywhere? Of course not. I just had to, like I've done so many times before, bite the bullet and move on. And remember too that other people's negativity is not your problem. Don't let people pull you into their storms. Pull them into your peace. Joel Osteen says, "You cannot expect to live a positive life if you hang with negative people. So when things don't go as planned, you may want to look at who you've been working with before you start over, perhaps without them." Instead of being swept up in the negativity that comes when your plans fall apart, find a positive way to move past it. We're human and we know it's a total drag when things go wrong, as it's going to be a load of work to get things going again, but stay positive. I won't use the glass is half full analogy, but Alphonse Carr has a great play on this reference to negativity from others. He says, "Some people grumble that roses have thorns. I'm grateful that the thorns have roses." What will be, will be. That's something I find myself repeating to myself when things are playing out. Such is life is another. Sometimes accepting that a greater universal play is in hand and your plans have failed is something you eventually must realise if you are going to move on. And I'm not saying to give up too soon. I'm saying that when all is lost, recognise your situation and accept that change is going to happen. And with all that said, you must find the power to just keep going. Next episode, I'm going to be discussing the sense of urgency that we must develop in ourselves if we're going to achieve our goals and our dreams in a timely manner. Have your moment of failure and accept it, then get back on your feet and dust yourself down. I'd like to end by saying that if your strategy has failed, if you've miscalculated in some way, made an error, or just a catalogue of bad choices, then you must learn from your mistakes before moving on again with a new strategy. Remember another famous quote from Albert Einstein. He famously said, "Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results." So I've covered elements of this topic before, but with the series of bad decisions and bad collaborations that I've had recently and my subsequent abandonment of my filmmaking goals this year, I really felt that I had to revisit it. I hope that it's been useful to you and has opened up your mind a little bit. I also hope that you continue to learn from my mistakes, which I catalogue here, despite my best efforts to avoid making them. Your call to action today is to think of a time when you've made a bad choice and ask yourself, have I learned from this? Am I still making the same mistake? If you are, then give yourself a shake and make a deal to never let it happen again. We are products of our past, but we don't have to be prisoners of it. Rick Warren, unquote. So please remember that your scars are a symbol of your strength, and embrace your failures. And if you're in a bad place, remember these words: this too shall pass. Just breathe and remind yourself that everything is going to be all right. So I'm looking for your help this season as I have an upcoming mailbag episode. It's effectively a listener's question show. And today's topic came up in a discussion with Glasgow filmmaker, a friend of mine, Colin Ross Smith. So your problems and questions are often very useful to me in identifying the problems that you're dealing with. That in turn will lead to better and more on-point shows for me to deliver. If you really want to help and need advice on a productivity topic or problem, please get in touch via the contact pages on the Film Pro Productivity website. That's filmproproductivity.com. You can also get in touch with me on any of the social networks. Don't delay though, as that show is going to be coming up in just a few weeks. Thanks again to Ian O'Neill from the How They Did It Filmmaking podcast for sponsoring this episode. Ian's show, I've talked about it a few times, is one of my favourites, so check it out and subscribe on all of the good podcasting apps. Let me end now with the words of Henry Ford. Failure is simply the opportunity to begin again. This time, more intelligently. Now, take control of your own destiny, keep on shooting, and join me next time on Film Pro Productivity. The music that you can hear right now is Adventures by Ihimitsu. You can view the show notes for this episode on the official website, filmproproductivity.com. You can follow my personal account on Twitter and Instagram at fight_director, or follow the show on Twitter at FilmProProdPod or on Facebook at FilmProProductivity. Please support the show by subscribing, spreading the word, and leaving an awesome review.